Into the Night Stories presents a true crime documentary. This video examines real events and historical records surrounding an unsolved murder case. This video discusses real criminal cases and may be distressing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Jack the Ripper is perhaps the most famous unidentified criminal in history. Operating in the Whitechapel district of London in 1888, the figure known by this name was linked to a series of savage murders that shocked Victorian society and drew attention to the grim realities of urban poverty and public safety. Though more than a century has passed, the Whitechapel murders case, as it was called, remains open in the public imagination, marked by ongoing investigations, historical debates, and cultural fascination. Before examining the murders themselves, it is important to understand who the victims were. In many retellings of the Whitechapel murders, the focus is placed almost entirely on the identity of the killer, often at the expense of the women who lost their lives. By looking first at their backgrounds, circumstances, and daily struggles, a clearer picture emerges of the social conditions that shaped their final months. These women were not simply victims of a single night's violence, but individuals navigating poverty, instability, and limited opportunity in Victorian London. Understanding their lives provides essential context for the crimes that followed, and allows the story of the Whitechapel murders to be told with greater accuracy and perspective. Ann Nichols, known as Polly Nichols, was born on the 26th of August, 1845. She was the first canonical victim of the unidentified serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, who is believed to have murdered and mutilated at least 5 women in and around the Whitechapel district of London from late August to early November 1888. At age 18, Mary married a printer's machinist named William Nichols. The ceremony was conducted on 16 January 1864 at St. Bride's Parish Church in the City of London, and was witnessed by 2 individuals named Seth George Havley and Sarah Good. Following their marriage, the couple briefly lodged at 30 to 31 Bouverie Street before residing with Mary Ann's father at 131 Trafalgar Street. Between 1866 and 1879, the couple had 5 children: Edward John, Percy George, Alice Esther, Eliza Sarah, and Henry Alfred. Mary was 5 feet 2 tall, had brown eyes, high cheekbones, and at the time of her death, graying dark brown hair. On 6 September 1880, the couple moved into their own home. Shortly thereafter, the couple separated, with William later relocating with 4 of his children to an address near Old Kent Road. Mary's father accused William of leaving his daughter after he had conducted an affair with the nurse, who had attended the birth of their final child, though William claimed to have proof that their marriage had continued for at least 3 years after the date of this alleged affair, claiming their marital troubles had been caused by his wife's heavy drinking and that he had embarked upon an affair only after Mary had left him. He later maintained to authorities that his wife had deserted him and was practicing prostitution. Over the following years, Mary was arrested several times for minor offenses such as drunkenness, disorderly conduct, and prostitution. By 1881, Mary is known to have resided at Lambeth Workhouse, where she described herself as a charwoman. She left this workhouse on 31st May. Her movements over much of the following year are unknown, although on 24th April 1882, she again returned to the Lambeth Workhouse. She is known to have lived with her father in Walworth for several months in 1883 before leaving his residence following an argument. Legally required to support his estranged wife, William Nichols initially paid her a weekly allowance of 5 shillings until the spring of 1882, when he received word that she was working as a prostitute. Upon hearing this news, he ceased making these payments, causing Mary to send summons via the Lambeth Union requesting the continuance of this weekly allowance. When parish authorities attempted to collect the maintenance money, William explained his wife had deserted her family, leaving their children in his care, and was living with another man, earning money through prostitution. As he was not legally required to support his wife, if she was earning money through illicit means, Mary no longer received any maintenance payments from her husband. Nichols spent the majority of her remaining years in workhouses and boarding houses, living off charitable handouts and her meager earnings as a prostitute, although she frequently spent her earnings on alcohol. By 1887, she had formed a relationship with a widower and father of 3 named Thomas Stewart Drew, although the couple separated on the 24th of October. By December 1887, Mary had begun sleeping rough in Trafalgar Square, although a clearance of the area on 19th December resulted in her returning to Lambeth Workhouse. On this occasion, she remained at this workhouse for less than 2 weeks. At approximately 11 p.m. on the 30th of August, 1888, Mary was seen walking along Whitechapel Road. She visited the Frying Pan Public House in Brick Lane, Spitalfields, leaving at 12:30 a.m. On 31st August by 1:20 a.m., she had returned to the kitchen of the Flower and Dean Street lodging house. 50 minutes later, she was seen by the deputy lodging keeper, who asked her for the 4 Ds required for her bed. When Mary replied she did not have the money, she was asked to leave the premises. Unconcerned, Mary motioned to her new black velvet bonnet, replying, "I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." She then left the lodging house with a likely intention of earning the money to pay for a bed via prostituting herself. Mary was last seen alive at approximately 2:30 a.m. Mary seemed notably drunk, and at one stage slumping against the wall of a grocer's shop. A passerby tried to get Mary to go back to her lodging house, but Mary refused, stating, "I have had my lodging money 3 times today, and I have spent it." At 3:40 a.m., a carman named Charlie Allen Cross discovered what he initially believed to be a tarpaulin lying on the ground in front of a gated stable entrance in Bucks Row, renamed Durward Street in 1892, Whitechapel, as he walked to his place of employment in Broad Street. The location was approximately 150 yards from the London Hospital, now renamed Royal London Hospital, and 100 yards from Blackwall Buildings. Upon inspecting the object, Cross discovered the tarpaulin was actually the body of a woman. She lay on her back with her eyes open, her legs straight, her skirt raised above her knees, and her left hand touching the gate of the stable entrance. Another passing cart driver on his way to work, Robert Paul, approached the location and observed Cross standing in the road, staring at her body. Cross called him over, and both men walked towards the body, which they examined. Cross touched the woman's face, which was still warm, then her hands, which were cold. He expressed his opinion to Paul that the woman was dead, but Paul was uncertain and thought she may simply be unconscious. The two pulled her skirt down to cover her lower body, then went in search of a policeman. Upon encountering P.C. Jonas Misen at the corner of Hanbury Street and Baker's Row, Cross informed the constable of their discovery, adding, "She looks to me to be either dead or drunk, but for my part, I believe she's dead." The two men then continued on their way to work, leaving Misen to inspect their discovery. Shortly before Misen reached Bucks Row, P.C. John Neal approached the street from the opposite direction on his beat, illuminating Mary's body with his lantern. By flashing this lantern, Neal attracted the attention of P.C. John Thane, as his beat passed the entrance to Bucks Row, shouting, "Here's a woman with her throat cut. Run at once for Dr. Llewellyn." Neal then inspected the crime scene to look for blood trails with his lantern. He saw none. He also examined the road, but saw no marks of wheels. P.C. Thane fetched Surgeon Dr. Llewellyn, who arrived in Bucks Row at 4 a.m. Llewellyn observed that 2 deep knife wounds had been inflicted to the woman's throat, and quickly pronounced her life extinct, determining through the fact her body and legs were still warm that she had been dead for approximately 30 minutes. He then ordered P.C. Neal to remove the body to the old Montague Street mortuary, upon a handcart Misen had fetched, stating, "Move the woman to the mortuary. She is dead. I will make a further examination of her." Mary's body was moved into the old Montague Street mortuary at 5:20 a.m. She had several injuries to her abdomen. Upon further examination of Mary's body, Dr. Llewellyn discovered that both sides of her face had been bruised by either a fist or the pressure of a thumb before her throat. Wounds has been inflicted from left to right. One of these 2 wounds measured 8 inches, and the other 4 inches in length. Both reached back to her vertebral column. Her vagina had been stabbed twice, and her abdomen had been mutilated with 1 deep, jagged wound, 2 or 3 inches from the left side. Several incisions had also been inflicted across her abdomen, causing her bowels to protrude the wounds, and 3 or 4 similar cuts ran down the right side of her body. These cuts had also been inflicted with the same knife, estimated to be at least 6 to 8 inches long, and possibly a cork cutter or shoemaker's knife. Each wound had been inflicted in a violent and downward thrusting manner. Dr. Llewellyn further opined his belief the murderer possessed some anatomical knowledge. Dr. Leland believed Mary had been facing her attacker when he had held his hand across her month before cutting her throat. Death would have been instantaneous, and all her abdominal injuries were made by the murderer after she was dead. Jack the Ripper's second victim was a woman named Annie Chapman. She was born on the 25th of September, 1840. On the 1st of May, 1869, Annie married John James Chapman, who was related to her mother. The marriage ceremony was witnessed by one of her sisters and a colleague of her husband. The couple had 3 children, Emily, Annie, and John. The couple sought medical help for their son John at a London hospital, before later placing him in the care of an institution for the physically disabled. Although Annie had struggled with alcoholism as an adult, she had reportedly weaned herself off drink by 1880. Her son's disability is believed to have contributed to her gradual reversion to alcohol dependency. In 1882, Annie's daughter, Emily, died of meningitis on her brother's 2nd birthday at the age of 12. Following the death of their daughter, both Annie and her husband took to heavy drinking. Over the following years, she is known to have been arrested on several occasions for public intoxication. By 1884, Annie and her husband separated by mutual consent. John retained custody of their surviving daughter. Her husband was obliged to pay her a weekly allowance of 10 shillings via post office order. The cause of the separation is unknown. 2 years later, John died of liver cirrhosis and edema. Annie found out of her ex-husband's passing from her brother-in-law. Her surviving daughter, Annie, aged 13, is believed to have either been placed in a French institution or to have joined a preforming troupe which traveled with a circus in French. By May or June 1888, Annie resided in a lodging house, paying 8 pence a night for a double bed, according to the lodging house deputy, Timothy Donovan, a 47-year-old bricklayer's laborer named Edward the Pensioner. Stanley would typically stay with Annie at the lodging house between Saturday and Monday, occasionally paying for her bed. 8 days prior to Annie's death, she had fought with a fellow Crossingham's lodging house resident named Eliza Cooper. The two were reportedly rivals for the affections of a local hawker named Harry, although Eliza later claimed the reason the two had fought had been because Annie had borrowed a bar of soap from her. This later resulted in Eliza attacking Annie in the face and chest, resulting in her sustaining a black eye and bruised breast. On 7 September, Amelia Palmer encountered Annie in Dorset Street. Amelia later informed police Annie had appeared visible pale on this occasion. After Annie's death, the coroner who conducted her autopsy noted her lungs and brain membranes were in an advanced state of disease, which would have killed her within months. On 8 September, shortly before 5 a.m., John Richardson entered the backyard of the property to check the padlocked cellar in the yard was still intact and to trim a loose piece of leather from his boot. Approximately 3 minutes later, he exited the property via the front door. At approximately 5:15 a.m., Albert Kadosh entered the yard of the property to use the lavatory. Albert later informed police he had heard a woman say, "No, no," before hearing the sound of something or someone falling against the fence. He did not investigate these sounds. Annie Chapman's mutilated body was discovered shortly before 6 a.m. by an elderly resident of 29 Hanbury Street named John Davis. Davis noticed that the front door was now open, while the back door was shut. Her body was lying on the ground near the doorway to the backyard, with her head 6 inches from the steps to the property. Davis alerted 3 men named James Green, James Kent, and Henry Holland to his discovery, before all 3 ran down Commercial Street to find a policeman, as Davis reported his discovery at the nearest police station. Annie's throat had been cut from left to right so deeply the bones of her vertebral column bore striations, and she had been disemboweled, with a section of the flesh from her stomach being placed upon her left shoulder, and another section of skin and flesh, plus her small intestines, being removed and placed above her right shoulder. The morgue examination revealed that part of her uterus and bladder was missing. Chapman's protruding tongue and swollen face led Dr. Phillips to believe that she may have been asphyxiated with the handkerchief around her neck before her throat was cut, and that her murderer had held her chin as he performed this act. As there was no blood trail leading to the yard, he was certain that she was killed where she was found on. The third victim was a woman named Elizabeth Long Liz Stride. She was born 27th November, 1843. On 7th March, 1869, Elizabeth married John Thomas Stride, a ship's carpenter from Sheerness, who was 22 years her senior. They married in a modest ceremony at St. Giles in the Fields Church. The couple had no children. By 1874, the Strides' marriage had begun to deteriorate, although they continued to live together. The following year, John Stride sold the coffee shop, likely due to financial hardship. In March 1877, Stride was admitted to the Poplar Workhouse, suggesting that the couple had separated by this date. However, census records from 1881 indicate the two had reunited and lived together in the district of Bow, although the couple had permanently separated by the end of that year, with Stride being admitted to a Whitechapel workhouse infirmary suffering from bronchitis in December 1881. She was discharged from this infirmary on the 4th of January 1882, and is believed to have taken residence in one of several common lodging houses on Flower and Dean Street, Whitechapel, shortly thereafter. 2 years later, on 24th October 1884, John Stride died of tuberculosis in the Poplar and Stepney Sick Asylum. While residing in common lodging houses, Stride occasionally received charitable assistance from the Church of Sweden in London, and from 1885 until her death lived much of the time with local dock laborer Michael Kidney, who resided in Devonshire Street. The couple had a tumultuous relationship and regularly separated, with Stride sleeping in local lodging houses before returning to live with Kidney. In April 1887, Stride filed a formal assault charge against Kidney, although she failed to pursue this charge in court, and the case was discharged. Her relationship with Kidney continued in an on and off manner between 1885 and 1888. On the day prior to her murder, Stride is known to have cleaned 2 rooms at her lodging house, for which she was paid 6pence. That evening she wore a black jacket and skirt with a posy of a red rose, and a spray of either maidenhair fern or asparagus leaves. Her outfit was complemented by a black crepe bonnet. In an effort to make her clothing look more respectable, she is known to have borrowed a brush from a fellow resident. At 6:30 p.m., Stride and Elizabeth Tanner briefly visited the Queen's Head pub on Commercial Street before Stride returned alone to the lodging house. Subsequent eyewitness accounts of Stride's movements later in the evening of the 29th of September and the early morning of the 30th of September indicate she may have been in the company of one or more acquaintances and or clients. The first of these individuals is described as a short man with a dark mustache, wearing a morning suit and bowler hat, with whom she was seen at approximately 11 p.m. at a location close to Burner Street. A second eyewitness account by laborer William Marshall places Stride in the company of a man wearing a peaked cap, black coat, and dark trousers standing on the pavement opposite number 58 Burner Street at approximately 11:45 p.m. According to Marshall, Stride had stood with this decently dressed individual, and the two had repeatedly kissed before the man had said to her, "You would say anything but your prayers." At approximately 1 a.m. on Sunday the 30th of September, 1888, Stride's body was discovered in the adjacent Dutfield's yard by Louis Diemschutz, the steward of the International Working Men's Educational Club. Diemschutz had driven into the poorly illuminated yard with his horse and 2-wheeled cart when his horse abruptly shied to the left to avoid what appeared to be a bundle lying upon the ground. Noting what he later described as a dark object lying on the ground, Diemschutz unsuccessfully attempted to lift the object with his whip handle before leaving his cart to inspect it. Upon lighting a match, Diemschutz saw a prone body. He immediately ran inside the club to check his wife was safe. After finding her safe and sound, he reported his discovery before the group promptly dispersed to seek help. Stride's body lay on her left side with her right hand upon her stomach and her left arm extended behind her back. Her left hand still clutched several cachous wrapped in tissue paper, and the bow of her checkered silk scarf had been pulled tightly to the left of her neck, possibly from behind. Blood was still flowing from a single knife wound inflicted to Stride's neck, and, although her hands were cold to the touch, other sections of her body were either slightly or quite warm. This suggests Stride was killed shortly before Diemschutz's arrival in the yard. Several patrons of the Working Men's Educational Club who had left the premises between 12:30 and 12:50 a.m. later informed police they had observed nothing amiss. The fourth victim is a woman named Catherine Eddowes. She was born 14th April 1842. Catherine began a relationship with former soldier Thomas Conway, who had served in the 18th Royal Irish Regiment and who received a small regimental pension. The couple had 2 children, Catherine Ann and Thomas Lawrence, and initially supported themselves by occasionally via laboring work when his health permitted. No evidence exists to support the two having actually married following their initial acquaintance in 1861 or 1862, although shortly after the two began a relationship, Catherine began referring to herself as Kate Conway. She later had Conway's initials, TC, crudely tattooed in blue ink on her left forearm. Their third child and second son was born in 1873. While residing in London, Catherine took to drinking, which caused rifts within her immediate family. According to later inquest testimony from Catherine's daughter, Catherine Annie Phillips, her parents began living on bad terms, largely because of her mother's drinking, which increased throughout the 1870s, and which her father, a teetotaler, found intolerable. By the late 1870s, the quarrels between the two are believed to have become violent, with Catherine occasionally being seen with black eyes and bruising about her face. By 1880, Catherine and Conway resided in a room at 71 Lower George Street, Chelsea, with their two youngest children. Their oldest child had left the household by this date. Sometime the same year, Catherine left Conway. The precise reason why Catherine chose to relocate from Chelsea to the East End of London is unknown, although by 1881 she was living with a new partner, John Kelly, a fruit salesman whom she had met when they both lodged at Cooney's Common Lodging House at 55 Flower and Dean Street, Spitalfields, at the center of London's most notorious criminal rookery. Thereafter she became known to acquaintances as Kate Kelly. Initially, while living in and around Spitalfields, Catherine most often earned money by performing domestic work, such as cleaning and sewing for the Jewish community in nearby Brick Lane, although she is believed to have also occasionally taken to casual prostitution to pay her daily rent. By the mid-1880s, she and Kelly also earned money by performing seasonal hop-picking work in Kent each summer. When Eddowes could not afford a bed in a common lodging house, she typically attempted to borrow money from her sisters or her daughter. She primarily attempted to borrow from her older sister, Elizabeth Fisher, who lived in Greenwich, and whom she also visited socially on occasion. If unsuccessful in her efforts to borrow money from relatives, she is believed to have slept rough in the front room of 26 Dorset Street, known locally as the Shed. The two reached London on the 27th of September, spending the night in the casual ward at Shoe Lane in the City of London. The two slept in separate lodging houses the following evening. Kelly sleeping at 52, Flower and Dean Street, Eddowes at the Mile End casual ward. Reportedly, upon her arrival at the casual ward, the superintendent asked Eddowes, who had frequently slept at the premises, where she had recently been, to which Eddowes replied she had been hop-picking. Eddowes then added she intended to claim the reward offered for the arrest of the Whitechapel murderer, adding, "I think I know him." In the early afternoon of the 29th of September, Eddowes informed Kelly of her intentions to travel to Bermondsey to attempt to borrow some money from her daughter, who by 1888 had been married to a gunmaker in Southwark for 3 years. The two parted company in Houndsditch at about 2 p.m., with Eddowes informing Kelly that she expected to return by 4 p.m. With money from pawning his boots, a barefooted Kelly took a bed at the lodging house just after 8 p.m., and according to the deputy keeper, he remained there all night. On the 30th of September, 1888, upon leaving the station, instead of turning right to take the shortest route to her Flower and Dean Street lodging house, Eddowes turned left in the general direction of Aldgate. She was last seen alive in a narrow walkway named Church Passage at 1:35 a.m. by 3 witnesses, Joseph Lawand, Joseph Hyam Levy, and Harry Harris, who themselves had just left the Imperial Club in Duke's Place on Duke Street. Lawende later testified Eddowes, wearing a black bonnet and jacket, was standing talking with a man of medium build with a fair moustache at the entrance to Church Passage, which led southwest from Duke Street and into Mitre Square. She was facing the man with one hand on his chest, although not in a manner to suggest to Lawende she was resisting him. Only Lawende could furnish a clear description of the man, whom he described as approximately 30, about 5 feet 7 inches, 1.70 meters, in height, and wearing a loose-fitting pepper and salt color loose jacket, a gray peaked cloth cap, and a reddish neckerchief. To Lawende, this individual conveyed the overall appearance of a sailor. Lawende walked past the two and did not look back. At 1:44 a.m., Eddowes's mutilated and disemboweled body was found lying on her back. with her head resting on a coal hole, and turned towards the left shoulder in the southwest corner of Mitre Square by the square's beat policeman, P.C. Edward Watkins, approximately 14 minutes after he had previously passed through the square at 1:30 a.m. Upon discovering Eddowes' body, Watkins called for assistance from the night watchman at the Kearley and Tongue warehouse which bordered Mitre Square, ex-policeman George James Morris. Morris had been sweeping the landings inside the warehouse with the door to the square open when Watkins knocked on the door, exclaiming, "For God's sake, mate, come to my assistance." After viewing the body, he informed Watkins he had noted nothing unusual that evening. The final victim was Mary Jane Kelly. She was born in 1863. Her exact birthday is unknown. When Kelly was aged approximately 16 in about 1879, she reportedly married a coal miner named Davis or Davies, who was killed 2 or 3 years later in a mining explosion. Without any means of financial support, Kelly relocated to Cardiff, where she lived with a cousin. Although there are no contemporary records of Kelly's presence in Cardiff, it is at this stage in her life that Kelly is considered to have begun working in prostitution, possibly being introduced to this profession by her cousin. By 1886, Kelly was residing at Cooley's lodging house in Thrall Street, Spitalfields. On the 8th of April, 1887, she became acquainted with 28-year-old Joseph Barnett, whom she first encountered on Commercial Street. Barnett, who worked as a fish porter at Billingsgate Market, took Kelly for a drink before arranging to meet her the following day. The two agreed to live together upon their second meeting on the 9th of April. Initially, Barnett and Kelly lodged in George Street, close to Commercial Street. They later took lodgings in Little Paternoster Row, but were soon evicted for non-payment of rent and drunk and disorderly conduct. They later took lodgings in Brick Lane before relocating to Miller's Court, off Dorset Street, in either February or March 1888. According to Kelly's friend and neighbor, Lizzie Albrook, Kelly was heartily sick of the life she was leading by 1888 and wished to return to Ireland where her people lived. Her landlord, John McCarthy, later recollected, "She was a very quiet woman when sober, but noisy when in drink." When drunk, Kelly would often be heard singing Irish songs, although when intoxicated, she would often become quarrelsome and even abusive to those around her, which earned her the nickname Dark Mary. Barnett lost his employment as a fish porter in July 1888, reportedly due to committing theft. As a result, Kelly again resorted to prostitution. According to Barnett, she began to allow other prostitutes to sleep in their room on cold, bitter nights, as she did not have the heart to refuse them shelter. Initially, Barnett was tolerant of this until he and Kelly quarreled over her sharing the room with a prostitute he knew only as Julia. Barnett subsequently left 13 Miller's Court on the 30th of October, more than a week before her death, taking lodgings at 24 to 25 New Street, Bishopsgate. Nonetheless, between the 1st and 8th of November, Barnett visited Kelly on an almost daily basis, occasionally giving her money. Elizabeth Prater, who resided in the room directly above Kelly's, and who had been awoken by her kitten walking over her neck, and Sarah Lewis, who had slept at No. 2 Miller's Court on the 8th and 9th of November, both reported hearing a faint cry of "murder" between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., but did not react because they reported that it was common to hear such cries in the East End. Lewis described this cry as "only one scream. I took no notice of it." She claimed not to have slept and to have heard people moving in and out of the court throughout the night. Prater did leave her room at approximately 5:30 a.m. to walk to the Ten Bells pub for a drink of rum. She saw nothing suspicious. On the morning of the 9th of November 1888, the day of the annual Lord Mayor's Day celebrations, Kelly's landlord, John McCarthy, sent his assistant, ex-soldier Thomas Bowyer, to collect the rent. Kelly was 6 weeks behind on her payments, owing 29 shillings. Shortly after 10:45 a.m., Bowyer knocked on her door, but received no response. He then attempted to turn the handle, only to discover the door was locked. Bowyer then looked through the keyhole, but could not see anybody in the room. Pushing aside the clothing used to plug the broken window pane and the muslin curtains which covered the windows, Bowyer peered inside the room, discovering Kelly's extensively mutilated corpse lying on the bed. She is believed to have died between 3 and 9 hours before the discovery of her body. The body was lying naked in the middle of the bed, the shoulders flat but the axis of the body inclined to the left side of the bed. The head was turned on the left cheek, the left arm was close to the body with the forearm flexed at a right angle and lying across the abdomen. The right arm was slightly abducted from the body and rested on the mattress. The elbow was bent, the forearm supine with the fingers clenched. The legs were wide apart, the left thigh at right angles to the trunk, and the right forming an obtuse angle with the pubis. The whole of the surface of the abdomen and thighs was removed, and the abdominal cavity emptied of its viscera. The breasts were cut off, the arms mutilated by several jagged wounds, and the face hacked beyond recognition of the features. The tissues of the neck were severed all round down to the bone. The viscera were found in various parts, viz., the uterus and kidneys with one breast under the head, the other breast by the right foot, the liver between the feet, the intestines by the right side, and the spleen by the left side of the body. The flaps removed from the abdomen and thighs were on a table. The bed clothing at the right corner was saturated with blood, and on the floor beneath was a pool of blood covering about 2 feet square. The wall by the right side of the bed, and in a line with the neck, was marked by blood, which had struck it in several places. The face was gashed in all directions, the nose, cheeks, eyebrows, and ears being partly removed. The lips were blanched and cut by several incisions running obliquely down to the chin. There were also numerous cuts extending irregularly across all the features. The neck was cut through the skin, and other tissues right down to the vertebrae, the fifth and sixth being deeply notched. The skin cuts in the front of the neck showed distinct ecchymosis. The air passage was cut at the lower part of the larynx through the cricoid cartilage. Both breasts were more or less removed by circular incisions, the muscle down to the ribs being attached to the breasts. The intercostals between the fourth, fifth, and sixth ribs were cut through, and the contents of the thorax visible through the openings. The skin and tissues of the abdomen from the costal arch to the pubes were removed in 3 large flaps. The right thigh was denuded in front to the bone, the flap of skin, including the external organs of generation, and part of the right buttock. The left thigh was stripped of skin fascia and muscles as far as the knee. The left calf showed a long gash through skin and tissues to the deep muscles and reaching from the knee to 5 inches above the ankle. Both arms and forearms had extensive jagged wounds. The right thumb showed a small superficial incision, about 1 inch long, with extravasation of blood in the skin, and there were several abrasions on the back of the hand, moreover showing the same condition. On opening the thorax, it was found that the right lung was minimally adherent by old firm adhesions. The lower part of the lung was broken and torn away. The left lung was intact. It was adherent at the apex, and there were a few adhesions over the side. In the substances of the lung, there were several nodules of consolidation. The pericardium was open below, and the heart absent. In the abdominal cavity, there was some partly digested food of fish and potatoes, and similar food was found in the remains of the stomach attached to the intestines. Phillips believed that Kelly had been killed by a slash to the throat and the mutilations performed afterward. Bond stated in a report that the knife used was about 1 inch, 25 millimeters, wide and at least 6 inches, 150 millimeters, long, but didn't believe that the murderer had any medical training or knowledge. He wrote, "In each case, the mutilation was inflicted by a person who had no scientific nor anatomical knowledge. In my opinion, he does not even possess the technical knowledge of a butcher or horse slaughterer, or a person accustomed to cut up dead animals." After examining the lives of the victims, attention inevitably turns to the figure known as Jack the Ripper. Despite the intense public interest and extensive investigation, almost nothing is known with certainty about the individual responsible for the Whitechapel murders. No confirmed identity, motive, or personal history has ever been established. One of the most enduring questions surrounding the case is why the killings appeared to stop after the murder of Mary Jane Kelly in November 1888. Several explanations have been proposed, though none can be proven. One possibility is that the killer died shortly after the final murder. Given the harsh living conditions of Victorian London, illness or injury could have easily gone unrecorded, particularly among the poor. Another theory suggests that the killer may have been imprisoned for an unrelated offense, institutionalized, or otherwise removed from society, without ever being linked to the murders. It has also been suggested that the murderer may have left London altogether. The East End population was highly transient, and movement between cities, or even countries, was not uncommon. If the killer relocated, further crimes may have occurred elsewhere without being connected to the Whitechapel murders. Some historians argue that the murder of Mary Jane Kelly represented an escalation that was difficult to repeat. As the only victim killed indoors, the crime allowed more time and privacy than the earlier attacks. Increased police presence and public vigilance following this murder may have made further attacks too risky. Another possibility is that additional murders did occur, but were never conclusively linked to the same offender. At the time, record keeping was inconsistent, and violent deaths among impoverished women were not always thoroughly investigated. As a result, the so-called canonical five may reflect the limits of historical evidence rather than the full extent of the crimes. Ultimately, the question of why the murder stopped remains unanswered. Like the identity of Jack the Ripper himself, it is shaped by missing records, unreliable testimony, and the passage of time. What remains is a case defined not only by what is known, but by what can no longer be recovered. I wanted to approach this case a little differently by focusing first on the people involved, rather than just the mystery itself. The Jack the Ripper case is often discussed in terms of theories and suspects, but looking at the victims and the world they lived in adds important context to what happened. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I really appreciate your support, and I'll see you in the next one.